Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Walker Cinema. My name is Pablo De Ocampo. I'm the director and curator of Moving Image here. And I'm thrilled to have you here for the movies tonight. I'm going to begin tonight just by acknowledging that the Walker Arts Center sits on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota. This site where we are was once an expansive marshland and meadow, and it was an area that was very important for the Dakota, who called this home, but many other indigenous nations who lived in and around this area and still do today. These are things that we say at the beginning of many cultural events and other sort of organized gatherings of people. I like to just sort of sometimes remember or say out loud to myself, like, why do we say these things? What are these for? For me, they are a way of trying to like acknowledge and think about and remember where I am and what the history of the place that I am in. And also to think about what are the many different sort of political situations that have sort of fallen upon that land, displaced people, removed people from that land, and how that affects how I live, where I live, and also like what is the work that we do as artists that speaks to those kinds of political realities and histories, not just here in Minnesota, but many other places as well. I am thrilled to welcome you all here for Bitterroot by Vera Brunner-Sung. We're really thrilled to have this film here at the Walker. It's something that we've been really, really excited to show. It is going to be here tonight and tomorrow night, but you're here tonight, which is a special night because we have, as you might have guessed from the chairs here on the stage, a whole crew of people here who are part of this film. Bitterroot's a film, if you don't know what you're here to see, I'm just going to give you a quick little overview. It's a film about a family and a group of friends and related people in a Hmong community in Montana. It was shot and made in Montana, but many folks here from the Hmong community in St. Paul and the Twin Cities were very actively part of this. So you're going to see a lot of names that you might be familiar with, see a lot of faces that you might be familiar with. And it's a really not just an incredibly beautiful film to enjoy and watch as a narrative, but also I think a really beautiful example of how many different creatives and collaborators come together to make a film. That films are this really kind of amazing art form that aren't necessarily just always a singular person's vision, but are things that are like really made in teams and in collaborations. So we're really thrilled to welcome a whole group of people here for a Q&A after the film. I'm going to invite the film's director, Vera Brunner-Sung, who's here from Chicago, to say a couple of words before the film. And other than that, enjoy the film. The film's about 85 minutes. We'll be up here with a whole group of people that we'll introduce when people are up here, because that's a long ways from now, so you won't remember everyone's name. But thanks so much for coming. Over to Vera.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Pablo, and the whole Walker team for having us. I just wanted to briefly thank our funders before we screen. Spark Features, Louverture Films, The Hidden Fortress, Dungeon Beach, Center for Asian American Media, the Sundance Institute Feature Film Program, and Asian American Fellowship, the Montana Film Office, the Prop Foundation, Ohio State University, the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs, Climate Crisis, and Media Arts Working Group, and the Ohio Arts Council. So thanks to them, thanks to you all, and looking forward to talking after the film.
I am going to start by maybe just going down the line and having everyone introduce themselves, because there's a lot of folks up here. And if you could all just sort of say who you are and say what your role in the film was.
Hi, I'm Vera Brunner-Sung, the writer, director, and editor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kazua Melissa Vang. I am the producer, one of the producers, first AD, local caster, and also ADR producer.
My name is Yang, and I'm one of the producers and the production designer.
Hello, I'm Joel. I'm the art director.
Hello, my name is Randy Zhang. I was the second assistant director for the film, and I also composed a small little piece in the film as well.
My name is Tu Chang. I was one of the first assistant cameras, and I also did some of the grip and electric work as well.
My name is Pashwa Vang, and I play the role of the Nineng, or Pokyo.
It's so great to have you all here. It's really not every day that we do screenings here with we do screenings with artists here, but not with such an immensely like representative crew of people from all over the sort of the spectrum of contributions to the film. I think a really good place to start this conversation would maybe be to just ground us in a little bit of like an origin story. This is like a film that's you all live here. You don't live here. You live in Chicago. But this film takes place in Montana. And maybe this is like a question that can kind of happen between Vera and Melissa and Yang about like, how did this begin? Where did you guys all get connected, and where did the story come from?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it took some time to really come to fruition, and I think it started when I used to live in Missoula in like 2012, 13, 14, 15, and was kind of coming to Missoula from Southern California and getting to know that place. I made a feature film in Missoula in like 2013, I guess. And I noticed that there were not a lot of people of color in Missoula, and came to learn about the Hmong community there. I got to know Yang, I guess around the time of like I had moved to Ohio in 2015. I was wondering about this possibility of maybe telling a story from that community there, mostly because of my own kind of the starting point creatively for me was thinking about what I'm always thinking about, which is like displacement and belonging, and being myself a child of immigrants and someone who grew up in the Midwest. Kind of far from my extended family. It's something that I always think about. How do you kind of create home and create a sense of belonging for yourself? And so I was really kind of tuned in on that sort of central piece, I guess, of a story that could be set in the Hmong community. And it was really when Yang, expressed potential interest in the story as well, that we really embarked on the journey of like figuring out the story and the script and starting to build the family around the film that could make it happen.
I think, because I'm born and raised in Missoula, Montana, so I lived there for 24 years, and then it wasn't until I graduated college that I moved here to Minnesota, and I think it was during that time when I moved here, 2016-ish, where Vera reached out to me about this project or the script that Vera has been writing, and then that's when I got to see like a really, really early draft of Bitterroot, and it's come a long ways. It looked very different. It read really different. The characters felt really different, and with the help of the Missoula Hmong community and a lot of the expertise, and then also with Melissa's jumping onto the project a couple years later, we were able to bring forth what you guys saw here today.
Yeah, my journey with Bitterroot, so there's a lot of things happening. So I would call it serendipitous in terms of how I came in, because I was part of the Karaoke Film Festival, which is a local Hmong film festival here in the Twin Cities. And when I made the decision to start like working as a filmmaker in terms of producing, I happened to work on a pilot show called Nice, and I brought in Yang, and that's how we met Keejin, who is the DP for Bitterroot. And Yang and Keejin were talking about the same story project and the same person, and they found out that it was Vera. And then it just so happened that the summer of 2018, I went with Ying with a couple of friends. We went to Missoula to go visit, and Vera and Keejin were there, and we had a discussion about the film. And I met Vera. They were doing a reading, and they got feedback from the community, which was really hard, which was good. And then when I had a talk with Vera, I asked her the same question with a lot of us who asked, which is, why are you making this film? What do you see? What's your intention? And then who are you bringing in to help shape it? And how are you again, being inclusive with the Hmong community. And so even for me, I'm not from Missoula, Montana. I'm actually born and raised here in the Twin Cities, and I don't have that lived experience. So I don't ever speak for the Hmong Missoula community, but what I can advocate for is being Hmong and be critical about like the Hmong lens when we watch the film, and remember and remind myself that I am also a Hmong audience when I watch this. So then going into this was kind of going in with the attitude, and also with like trying to bring in more Hmong people in front and behind the camera, but also how do we bring in the voices and the critiques from the Hmong Missoula community.
I'd love to hear also just from all the four of you down there, starting with Je, like what was your point coming into the film? Like, how was your connection? How did you get sort of like drawn into this project?
It's on, right? Okay. I came in, I think it was literally like 3 months before we had to go to Montana. And I think it was at the point in my own personal life, in my own artistic career, where I wanted to challenge myself in filmmaking. And I had to give big thanks to Yang for trusting in me and advocating for me to hop on this project. And yeah, I think it was just we've worked together before, so then we've already had a film community together. So then so through 5 years of working together on film projects, that Ying's like, I believe in you. So I was like, okay. Like so it's like, hop on. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna quit my job. I'll see you there. So yeah, about 3 months before we started filming. Yeah. And I'll pass it on to Randy.
Hello, everyone. My story, I think, kind of begins when I think I first met Vera back in 2018. I was part of that crew that went to Montana. So I think that was the first time, we got to hear about it. I mean, like prior to that, we got to hear it in passing from, Yang a lot. And I think just very grateful to, especially Melissa, who, brought us in from NICE, especially most of the crew here. Shout out to like Chris from In Progress as well for like, helping and facilitate that process of bringing in a lot of the Hmong filmmakers from the Twin Cities to that Missoula set. My journey started 2018 and then, heard about it in passing, and then 4 years passed when they're like, all right, now to go. Randy, what are you good at? I guess I've done AD work for all of our short films between our friends, so I guess I could do a little bit out of AD work. So I got brought on as the second AD, and then, we did a lot of paperwork stuff, which is, kind of, albeit it's boring, but it's necessary in, the filmmaking world. So thankful for the opportunity. It was great over there. And then also, Melissa had expressed, after we were done filming, hey, do you want to do some sound stuff? I was like, oh yeah, I'd be very interested in doing some sound stuff. So I got to do some sound apprenticing in New York, which is great. Which is now I'm a sound person, so that kind of I got to live in that space for a week, and I loved it. And now I'm doing like sound stuff now, and then also composed that garage scene where the girls are practicing their K-pop dance. I actually produced and composed that track as well. And then also shout out to my mom, Tongva. I had advocated for her song to be in the film. I think it kind of poetically fits so well with the film and just the message that was put on screen, and then coinciding with my mom's song as well. So that's how I was brought onto Bitterroot.
I'm not sure where my story began with Bitterroot. For a long time, I had heard Yang and Melissa talking about Bitterroot. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes pre-production stuff that they were working on that they couldn't tell me about. I would ask, like, hey, what's going on with that? And, you're going to bring people here to work on it? And they're like, we can't tell you anything. And so it wasn't until, I think, just a few months before we all finally left for Montana that Melissa finally told me that, yes, we're going to be bringing you on. This is like literally 3 or 4 months before it happened.
Tape auditions. You helped tape auditions, I think, right?
Did I?
Like Jack? That's where I met you first.
Oh, okay, yes, then 2018. Yeah, it was so long ago too. It was In Progress too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, In Progress. And yeah, and also it was at a time in my life where I just wanted to be able to test myself creatively and technically as well, and it was a great chance to do it.
So I've been a community theater actor for over 20 years now. And Melissa and I met when she was very young. We were just reminiscing earlier at dinner that we were on a project and went to Eau Claire to do a show in 2008 or something like that. Babies. And so I auditioned for the role. And between learning about the project and auditioning, I worked with this team on a bunch of other projects, short films and webisodes, and they're amazing. These are top-notch filmmakers. Like, everyone here writes, and they're behind the scenes, and I come in for 5 days and shoot scenes, but they live in this project, in this world, and it's just an amazing team up here. I would work with them again any day.
Something that I really love about this film is how like multifaceted and layered it is. And so like obviously in the narrative, it is like very rooted with this Hmong family and the community around that family. But, it's also a film about climate change. It's a film about colonialism and its impacts that sort of drove this sort of migration and immigration of people from Southeast Asia. It's a film about colonialism in Montana and sort of where those effects are felt in the land and in the people there. But I remember when I heard about this film maybe a little over a year ago, I was like, and I know Vera and her films from also a long time ago, and I was like, oh, huh. Vera's not Hmong. What is that? What is this? So I'm really curious to hear about. When I saw the film, I was like, this is really beautiful and this works so wonderful. I think there's a really important thing that has been having a lot of space and being foregrounded in filmmaking and other storytelling about people really being able to tell and own their stories. But there's another sort of side to that stories are complicated and overlapping and interrelated and interconnected. And I think that's what I really reacted to when I first watched this film was a bit of a surprise. Not that I didn't trust that you could make a great film, but a bit of like, wow, that is really like a wonderfully beautiful story that is both so directly feels like it's rooted in this Hmong community, but feels like it's about so many more things. So that was a long way of saying, I'm curious to hear about some of those early development moments. You sort of referenced, Melissa, like some of those first readings had a lot of thoughts or comments come back. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process, about how you as, a group of, different people working on a project from different perspectives and different backgrounds navigated how to tell a very specific story, but one that is like being approached from many different angles.
Do you want to start? I feel like
Me?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is that a lot of it was, I feel like you and we can talk about it even deeper, because there's part of it that really roots into Yeej in how he like read it, saw it, and then also the conversations from the aunties and the cousins and the uncles from Missoula and their input. But in terms of the script, I mean, anyone who's made films will kind of, here's a little thing, and not to like break a delusion about film, but what you see on screen is completely different from what was written on paper. And the reason why is because what was written on paper is like almost like a blueprint for filmmakers to collaborate and work together. And then when you film it, there's some logistical things that you're gonna have to make decisions on. in terms of like what we have or how things are being shot. And that's a collaborative work that Vera had with Keegan. And then it comes down to the editing, which Vera was also editor. So think about it, Vera, you're doing like three things, which is the writer, the director, and then the editor. But in every process, there was a checkpoint over like where we were, well, I felt like I was the bad cop on that. I was like, Vera, no, man, like, you messed up. You can't do it this way. Or like, it's kind of like, I don't understand why is this scene like this? Or these sequences, or like, even like when we're like, oh, let's talk to the expert, or let's get references from like the Missoula community. So one example is like the Oneng scenes and the chants that the shaman did, which I want to acknowledge Ietao. She was the shaman who we talked to from Missoula, and those were actually her words that she let us use for the recordings and also for Pashwa to actually say, which was a challenge, right? But she graciously gave it to us for this film, and that is built on trust. And so what it is that this film was not just about making a movie, making a story about Hmong people in Missoula, but it's also built upon relationships that they trust us to do the story. Because just a note is that we premiered at Tribeca last year, 2024, and even before we had the world premiere at Tribeca, Yang and we flew to Missoula that Sunday for the Missoula community to watch it. And if they didn't approve, well, hey, Sarah, hey, Vera, sorry, we got to pull out.
We're going to pull it out of Tribeca. Just kidding.
Yeah. We showed them an earlier cut too. I mean, we like went and had like a fine cut screening, so we had a sense of like how people would react. Yeah, but I mean, this back and forth, the sort of conversation around the story, and getting it to feel right. It's like, a community is not like a monolith, right? And people are going to have different ideas and experiences and opinions. And so the work of trying to tell a really specific story that's from a very specific geographical region and community, and also making sure it feels true to the folks there. I mean, that was sort of the first audience really for the film, because if it didn't feel true to them, it was not going to, it wouldn't be successful to any of us, I think. And so, yeah, I mean, that was sort of, I really wanted, it's like I wanted Melissa to be, would you call yourself a bad cop? So we just needed that, and we had, maybe you saw in the credits, like a number of consultants too. We had 3 different shamans, and a number of like informal, like folks in Missoula who read drafts of the script. And, it was like a small things just to say like that added, that helped, describe what it feels like the bonfire scene. I think I'd written the dialogue was actually, they improvised that, but it was very close to what I wrote. Because, knowing that things would be improvised, and also not being, I don't speak Hmong, I don't write Hmong, writing sort of the essence of the dialogue, but then opening it up to the actors to be like, how would you actually say this? Would you actually say this, right? But in the bonfire scene, I remember getting a note from Longcha, who lives in Missoula, and was like, well, my main note here is like, he would shake everyone's hand when he gets to the bonfire. And I think I had like, oh, he comes in and they like say hi or whatever. And it was like, oh, of course, right? And so that is something that changed. There were other, like, in an early meeting that we had with the community folks, was like presenting the synopsis of the story. And, the big note was that in the earlier version of the film, Lou gets lost in the forest. Oh, yeah. And the feedback was that would never happen. So it's like, noted. Okay. So things like that. And then also things about the sequence of rituals and all of that was always something that, I had to, but also, prioritize being open to, right? in the process. But also, alongside this, wanting to tell a story that feels authentic to the Missoula Hmong community and connects with true experiences, was wanting to tell a Montana story and wanting to tell an American story. It's like with the character of Eddie, the Native woman. It's like, oh, if I'm going to tell a story in America, there always has to be, I always feel for myself, there needs to be some indigenous presence here. And we cast April, who is actually Bitterroot Salish, from the tribe that's originally in that area where we were filming. And so just wanting to kind of, I don't know. I don't want to be too prescriptive about how I talk about these layers that you're noticing. But these are all things that are so unique to Montana and this country. And that's important to me, kind of like an important part of my, my sort of interests and connection to place.
I think it's also the trust that Vera put into like Melissa and I as Hmong, but also her producers, where it's like these conversations that we would have, right? When there is like a disagreement, it's not like no, I really want this in there. It's more of a conversation where it's like, okay, so let's talk about why it doesn't make sense, right? And then again, going back to the Missoula community and Vera holding herself accountable to talking to the Missoula community, holding more than just one conversation session, right? We did it multiple times over the course of almost a decade, right? Before we even filmed this, we went into production. So putting the trust into the Missoula community to help guide us in this story, because when you write a story about the Hmong people, but then you place it in a community where you could pinpoint where it's like, this story is about you, right? We really wanted to make sure people felt safe. And I think Vera just held her end of the promise and this whole idea and this whole concept of, if we were to do Bitterroot, the promise is we're going to write the script. I'm going to lean on you guys, and we're going to lean on the Missoula community to help guide us through this process to make sure it's authentic, but also a good representation of the Missoula Hmong community. Because the last thing we want to do is go into a community and make it seem like we're pinpointing the story about a specific person. And I always joke about this, but it's a community I go back to all the time. So if I can't go back to my own community, we did something wrong. And that's it.
We were not going to do that.
Right.
That was
and it's like nobody else has to go back, but it's my community. But I felt good with this because the voices of the Hmong Missoula community was heard, and it wasn't just my parents. It was everyone beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, that was an early question. It was like, well, what do you all want to see, right? Or what do you, because rightfully this question of well, what are you trying to say about us? It's like, well, what do you want us to say? Just and to be able to contextualize. This is one family, but you have a sense of a broader community too, and that it's about connection and to get coming together is sort of at the heart of the story, I think.
May I just share a quick short story? The scene where I'm in with Q, who plays the mom, and Yang's mom, who plays the other auntie, we rehearsed 30 minutes right before that scene. And they were like, oh, I'm going to say this, and then I'll say this, and we'll say this. I'm like, what? No, we need to I need to know what you're going to say so I'll know how to respond to that. Oh, no, we'll just say this. And then, and so it was the naturalness of the actors in the scenes and using the script as a blueprint, but really allowing them to make those choices as well was huge.
I also was not part of casting, so casting my mom was not my choice.
And another thing that I find really quite wonderful about this film is, and maybe this is a question between Fashwa and Melissa around your portrayal of the shaman, although it comes up in other parts of the film, and Melissa, your role of maybe being the bad cop, is how the film both sort of feels like it is very true to a community. I'm not from the Hmong community, so I'm just projecting or imagining or getting a feel from that. It does feel like it's very true. It feels like it's very honest, in an honest, ethical relationship. But it also feels like it doesn't have to explain itself. There's so much, again, as an outsider, that I appreciate in this film for it not telling me why this song is being sung, not telling me why there's an amulet so directly or obviously. And I think that restraint of holding back was really quite wonderful. And I wonder, I don't know, as someone performing in the film, like, how were you thinking about that in your performance, or who you might be performing for, or what you thought an audience that might not be Hmong might get out of your performance or understand of what you were doing?
I grew up with that traditional background, and it was also never explained to me. So then I just did it. That's true to a sense, but it was very...
Which is also maybe the experience of being the child of an immigrant, where you're like, well, I don't know. That's just what like my parent is doing.
Yes. It is very important in our lived experience, but it didn't need to be explained. And so I felt like it was great that we were in a community of ourselves. So why would we explain that to each other as well? And we had Melissa, Yang, and then Tong, who was so helpful. He was part of the crew, but his mom is a shaman, and so I'd be like, Tong, can I do it like this? Like I know, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And so lots of those moments. And you really were intentional about keeping it like spiritually safe for all of us to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing is that I'm like, minus B, it doesn't hurt. It never hurts to be safe. But in terms of Bitterroot, like a lot of the question I give to Vera in terms of like creative direction is like, well, what's the differentiation between the lived world and the spiritual world? Which I jokingly was telling Vera, like, spirits are naked. So,
And Wa was like, please no.
Yes.
Please no.
Or like, can you guys, can we make an argument? I haven't, make an argument why spirits are not naked. But like, they're wandering in the woods and everything. But I think for me, it was definitely setting the tone and understanding how sensitive in terms of the spirituality it can be, and knowing that it doesn't speak for the full Missoula community, but a very specific one. And every family does it differently. Understandably, everyone does it differently. But there's an underline of like, we don't understand because they don't tell us, but also they don't want to tell us because they're just like, it requires more language that either they invent, or it's old language, or it's like English bullshit. I don't know, and so then what we refer to is we go back to the Hmong Missoula, to Iatau, to we're talking to like Tassie. And this is a lot on Vera, who had to do the research, do the work. One thing I want to talk, and Pasha, you can talk about this, is the singing. Because remember, we had to do ADR for the spiritual calling. And to us, it might sound somewhat natural, or somewhat like a little bit like it doesn't flow out naturally, and there's a reason why.
So Q and I shared a living space when we were in Montana, and I had this recording from Iatau, and I listened to it probably 1,000 times. But I couldn't get the same tone that she had in her voice. And as Q was listening to me practice, she was like, oh, that's because Nimo Khoneng. And you don't. So she has spirit guides that helped her have that tone in her voice and that lyrical poeticness in her voice that I couldn't emulate as hard as I tried. And I was like, oh, thank you, Q, for saying that, because I'm like, I can't get that resonance, that tone, that flow. And also, I think being Hmong American, Hmong is my first language, but now it's my more stuttered language, that there's forgiveness in that too. Modern shamans coming up these days may not be doing it in Hmong. They may be doing it in a different language. They may be doing it in English soon. But there was forgiveness there and grace there in trying to do that. But having listened to it almost 1,000 times, and it was like a minute, 13 seconds of my life, just really wanted to do it justice. And the the words, like that was what mattered. Like whether my tone was good or whatnot, it was the words that needed to be said.
I was just going to say last quick question, but do you have something to add?
Well,
to that?
I was just going to say this larger question of like, what do you translate and what do you not translate, and like what do you kind of explain or not explain? And you probably noticed we did not explain a lot of things intentionally, but I think that sort of, it's the audience as like a viewer, right? If your comfort with that, your willingness to sort of, if you're not Hmong, first of all, like, as far as how you can sit with that maybe discomfort or curiosity or the sort of your openness to being alongside rather than having information given to you, right? So that I think we acknowledge that as a unique thing about this film, and it's something that when we were testing cuts of this with folks, like Hmong audiences and non-Hmong audiences or viewers had the same question, like, well, what if they don't understand? What if other people don't understand what's happening here? Like, how are you gonna, is that okay? Or like, do we want, so everybody had questions about that.
I said it's okay.
We're kicking out for some audience questions in just a moment, so get ready if you have one. But maybe a quick question before that sits somewhere between Randy and sound and maybe Vera and editing, is about the characters in this film are all people that are incredibly silent and underspoken. So I was struck by that in the sound design, maybe in the editing more so, because I think this is the first time I've seen it in a nice, big, proper cinema, and just how wonderfully crafted the sort of silences and pauses between people and how they speak just really stood out to me. So I was wondering if you had any comments or thoughts about that process.
On the sound process. I mean, so much of the sound design process that Randy was there for all of it is like finding these layers of ambience, right? And silence is, you notice silence when you hear a little bit of a sound, right? If you hear a footstep, you notice the silence more. Or like the wind in the trees or the crickets or all of that. And so we were like, Tim Korn, our sound designer, was like, is this too many crickets? I went a little nuts with the crickets in this one, sort of like dialing back these things, because it's the film wants to think about people as kind of belonging to place, and so the sounds of the place are, I like to think, like as important, right, as the words that people say. So there's that. Yeah, there's that connection to the landscapes, to what's beyond the frame. That was always kind of a part of my vision for how it would feel, at least. Yeah. Do you want to add anything about sound?
Yeah, I think when, because I went with another apprentice, Sean Wochupa, who's a musician, local musician here too, and it was actually quite interesting because, I think in this film in particular, I think the silence speaks louder than words. So when we get to hear some of like the little crickets here and there, or like, the wolves howling, or like the footstep of the deer that we don't get to actually see the deer, I think a lot of how I think about it too is that it kind of is like a magic trick when you think about sound. It's like you don't really think about these things subconsciously, but you do think about them subconsciously. Like surface level, you don't really think about it, but you're aware that, there's some suspension of disbelief that we have to accept when it comes to like sound design and the space that's around us, especially when we're thinking about it in the context of film. And that was the interesting piece, because because if you notice, I think we went back to this scene quite a bit in the editing room when I was watching Tim edit, but the scene where Lou's changing his shirt and he's inside the house, but there's like sprinklers that you can clearly hear. I'm like, that's a choice, right? Usually I think in my head, if sprinklers are running outside, I usually wouldn't hear that. But it's a nice touch just to add to the space. And I think subconsciously we understand that, this doesn't really make sense, but it brings me into the space because this is the sound that's, created for the actors or for the performance. And in conjunction with the film, I think it creates that idea, yes, we know he's in the house. We're shown imagery of him working on the land, the farmland, and now we get that little touch of sprinkles to like, oh, now, yeah, this place exists in terms of like this, this film that's being portrayed. And so that's how I like to think about it.
Great. Well, we have a mic in the aisle. If anyone in the audience has a question, shoot your hand up. We've got time for a few from the audience. Get your hand up and a mic will come to you.
Hi. So one of the main things I've seen throughout the film was the usage of just close-ups and just mainly headshots. I was wondering, like, what was the reason behind it, or the creative decision behind just all these close-ups?
I guess the conversations with Keejin about kind of how to visually approach. So it was informed by a few things, right? And one of the main ones was kind of to have a light footprint. We were in a lot of spaces that, people's homes. And we didn't want to take up a lot of room and spend, lean production, right? We're small production. And time was, time is always an issue, but time was an issue. And so, some scenes are covered with just one shot, right? We knew we weren't necessarily getting a lot of coverage for different scenes. And so, the way I thought about space in this movie is like contraction and expanding, and sort of how is a character feeling? Are they feeling trapped? Are they feeling stuck? Are we really just in their head, right? Or is there sort of an expansiveness, like when we go outside, right? Suddenly there's more room and there are more wide shots out there inside the house, or, at karaoke or whatever. It's a much more emotionally like intense and tight shot, right? More pressure. So it's kind of, it's a concept that's tied to the emotions of the characters. And then also informed by the actual space in a lot of these places that we were filming.
Could you just comment on the choice of the title?
Sure. So the Bitterroot Valley is the valley that goes south of Missoula. It is referenced once very sort of casually in the film when he's at the farmer's market and the woman buys mushrooms from him, and she says, "Oh, are these local?" And he says, "Oh yeah, they're from the Bitterroot." But it's sort of like another thing of like, it's there, if you know, but it's not explaining too much. So, but the film was always called Bitterroot. There was one moment where it was like, should it be something else? And I just could not think of anything else to call it. So yeah, but tied to the place there.
Perfect. Thank you for the film. Question I have is, with such a big diaspora of the Hmong community within like California, Wisconsin, North Carolina, everywhere, even Twin Cities here, what drew to like pinpointed to like the small community in Missoula in Montana?
I mean, it was really just my like random chance that I ended up living there, just it's because my husband got a job at the University of Montana. So we moved up there, and that was, I'm in my filmmaking, I'm very like tied to place. And so it's just always like really specific to one location that the story comes out of that. So yeah, so it never occurred to me to like try to tell a story anywhere else. And I think that goes to this, it's like it's a Hmong movie, it's a Montana movie. It's, yeah, that was the pull.
Maybe one more? Is anyone out there? If not, nope.
Yeah, I was curious, what was the inspiration or story behind the main character, Lou, like his story and his struggles?
So this is something that evolved. Yeah, do you want to?
I was going to make a joke.
Make a joke. It's Friday night.
So there's this one guy in Missoula. Just kidding. Just kidding. So if this is being recorded, Missoula, we love you. The story was about me. I'll hand it over to Vera.
I mean, okay, so the idea of a lone character who spends a lot of time by themselves and is like struggling to express themselves and feel a sense of belonging is like the character that haunts me all the time. And so then in like getting to know folks and talking about the story and thinking through these questions of like, what kind of story should this be? And like, what should the story say about people in Missoula and like all of these things? And how does it feel true? Right. I don't know, like talking with folks was like, I would test out ideas. I'd be like, okay, he's single, but he's like in his 40s. Well, why would that be? Oh, he must be divorced. I was like, okay, he's divorced, like this kind of, so it was sort of like built up through these things like, oh, the wife, she moved back to California. They're like, that happens, So it kind of came together through conversations and then my own sort of like emotional interests. Yeah.
I think one thing we can add too, if you notice, so one of the major critiques that I kept giving to Vera in terms of her building Bitterroot, the world, the characters, was to look at relationships. Because I think one thing that we as human can relate to is relationships to people, whether they be something more intimate like you and your siblings and your mom, you and your communities, you and your cousins, or you and your coworkers, right? There's something about relationships that universally we can relate to. And there's something about being Hmong that's very specific that it was always a challenge to Vera to really evaluate, not just from her, but also when looking into the Hmong characters, because I think one of the hardest thing that to make it come across for the Hmong audience is the relationship between Lou and his mom. And one of the things is like, it is because of the talents such as Wah and Q that they brought to life, Lou and Song, but it's also an understatement that I think we can all relate to. And so it comes down to language, it comes down to mannerism. And I think some of these things is like, Vera has to trust the talent to bring to life. In terms of the creation, it's like you can get all the research, you can do all these build-up backstories, but when the performance came, it was really up to like Lou, Wah, and Q who really brought that. And I just remember it was like we were filming the scene in the hospital and I was just crying. I was like, oh my God, okay, cut, that's a cut. And it's because it's like, we recognize those words. We recognize, the hard love that we get from our parents or no love in terms of they only do acts of service, or it's more of a complicated no talking. And so that's the thing that like Vera had to work with in terms of even building up like Lou and Q and also like May. And I will also agree with you, like your mom who plays the aunt too, right? So I think that's one thing that I feel that is pretty cool about Bitterroot is that we get to see that Hmong relationship, that it's not educating people about Hmong people, but it's like you get to witness and you get to be part of it. But that's something even special for those who know the language and those who actually have relationship with their mothers or the relatives, that they can find that layer into Bitterroot.
Yeah, it was so important that like the actors, right, could feel connected with these characters. And I think in the writing process, in the audition process too, like as folks came and learned about the project and auditioned, it was like, I could tell, and people would say like, oh, I feel a connection with this character. I understand this relationship. It's like, okay, the script is on the right track. Like it does, it makes sense. Right.
Yeah. And it so happened that the casting, what we did was non-traditional in terms of there's a casting director that has like this whole like spreadsheet full of Hmong actors. What we did is we went to the communities and did like casting, right? Just so happened that for the top three in terms of Q, Wah, and May, who plays the family, they all relate in a degree, like a large degree, from their own life that they can pull out to make it more real when you see it. But not to say that they can't do that, but and I don't know, Pasha, if you want to add about like, I think we even asked, we're like, is it okay if you want to play a shaman even, and
I'm
stuff?
not a shaman, but I grew up with a grandfather who was a shaman, and I saw it growing up. So it was just very familiar and natural to bring that to life.
Well, just really quick in closing before we get out of here, one of the very first conversations we had about arranging the screening, Melissa came back at me very quick and was like, well, what else can you do other than just a screening? Which I actually absolutely love. I think one of my favorite things to do here, like little window into the world of being a curator at the Walker for me here is like this just being an opportunity in a space of resources. And like, I often start conversations being like, well, what do you want to do here? So it was really great when people come with those sorts of questions. And the very first sort of thing that came up was, well, in addition to showing Bitterroot, it'd be really great to have like a moment where we can spotlight some of the many amazing Hmong filmmakers here in the Twin Cities community. So that's my little plug for next week, Thursday, May 22nd. We're going to have a little Hmong filmmaker showcase here with both some youth filmmakers, some folks who are a bit more established. Can you just say a quick little plug for that to get people to come back next week?
Yeah, so we have 4 amazing filmmakers, and we have 2 youth filmmakers. That will total of 6 filmmakers that will be showcasing their films here in this space on Thursday, May 22nd at 7 p.m. Melissa and I had such a wonderful time curating this, meeting these filmmakers, talking to them, and explaining what this opportunity is and what it's for. And we're just so excited for you guys to come out and support these filmmakers as well, because they're in our community and they're making great work. And so if you guys can, you guys should join us on May 22nd, Thursday, 7 p.m. In this space.
Yeah, and it's a free Thursday at the Walker, so you have no excuse to also check out the exhibit, but also support Cha, a local artist here who is gonna do an art activity at 5 o'clock. So if you're trying to figure out what to do, date yourself. Thursday is perfect, so come.
Thanks so much for being here. We'll be out in the lobby if you want to grab us for any other questions. Thanks.
Thank you.